It's time to accelerate. Hey friends, this is Andy. Welcome to episode 543, that's 543, of Accelerate, the sales podcast of record, where I hold in-depth conversations with today's leading experts in sales, marketing, and leadership 6 days a week. Joining me on the show today is Katie Bullard. Katie is the Chief Growth Officer at DiscoverOrg. And we're going to talk about how sales and marketing intelligence is democratizing growth and driving disruption, and how companies can use the data and sales intelligence to personalize their messages and make sure the sales teams are contacting people with intent. So if you'd like to see the show notes for this episode, in case you hear something in the interview and you missed it, want to go back and check, go to andypaul.com/543. You'll find there a timestamp breakdown of this conversation, and actually all the conversations that we've held on Accelerate. So make sure you check it out there. And friends, I mean, we all hit sales slump from time to time. And if you're looking for new ideas about how to amp up and accelerate your sales, then you need to read the new report that I put together just for you. It's based on the specific recommendations of more than 300 experts that I've personally interviewed on this program. And I've compiled their practical tactics and strategies into a step-by-step guide that you can use to accelerate your sales today. So don't wait. Go to accelerate.fm/accelerate to get your free copy of this report today. All right, let's jump into it with Katie. Katie Bullard, welcome to Accelerate.
Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for joining me. So I usually start the interviews with a standard question I ask my guests. And this one is, in your mind, what's the single biggest challenge facing sales reps today?
You know, I think one of the biggest challenges facing sales reps, and I never know if it's single. What I would say is, depending on the company or depending on the product or the market, there's probably something that's the singular biggest different at each company. But I think one of the consistently singular difficulties that sales reps face is figuring out how to prioritize. You know, we sort of live in this era of an overabundance of information and signals and noise. And as a sales rep, I have to understand how do I sift through that and prioritize both, you know, who I'm going to talk to, how I'm going to talk to them, how I'm going to structure my day. And no matter what company I've been in or what market I've been in, that consistently is a challenge.
Okay, how to sift through the noise to find the signal. I mean, I come from a communications background, satellite communications background.
Yeah.
We always talk with the signal to noise ratio, which is one of the key measurements of your strength of your link. And I think that seems to be true. I mean, we hear this more and more with people that Jill Conrath talks about. You know, the big challenge she sees as reps is this idea of overwhelm, not being overwhelmed, but overwhelm itself as a condition. And it seems like you're really talking about that is just so much as how do you prioritize? Yeah. How do you discern what's important?
And you know, I don't know that that's unique to sales reps. I think sales reps have a very sort of, you know, specific need for that. Just given the nature of the job. But, you know, I think whether we talk to a marketing team or a product team, right, that we're all sort of struggling with this need to sift through the noise and figure out where to prioritize. It tends to be more of an imminent need for the sales rep, right, because they've got the number in front of them each month. Mm-hmm.
Which never goes away.
Never. It gets bigger.
Well, I guess one question to sort of follow on to that then is of this noise, though, I mean, how much of it's just really sort of not really work related, just sort of extraneous, right? Because we're just living in a noisier environment in general.
Yeah, no, we are. I think, you know, I think it's both not work related, and yet at the same time, there's so much noise that might not be specifically work related, but that can actually make us better sales and marketers too. So there's sort of this double-edged sword. So like one example is, you know, if I'm trying to connect with a buyer, I really want to understand who they are, what they're interested in, both in the office and outside of the office. So then I start thinking to myself, okay, I need to go gather additional insights or information about, you know, what school they went to and what their hobbies are. And actually having some of that can make me a better sales or marketer, but at the same time, it can also completely immobilize me.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting point because I think back to sort of pre-internet days, and you still had the requirement to sort of find out that information, right? If you really want to do a great job. I mean, I sold very large, complex deals. I mean, absolutely had to know this information. It maybe took a different level of effort to some degree to get it, but it was still very important. But part of what I keep thinking back to is, we've got all this noise out there, but at the same time, we have all these tools, which are great access to information, DiscoverOrg being among those tools. But have we used the tools in such a way to help elevate, the performance and productivity of individuals? Or are we just making it more difficult?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I would say one of the most common requests that we get from our customers is, your data is great. Now help me figure out how to use it to be a more effective prospector. Mm-hmm. Because I've got your data, I might have another data source over here, and as a sales rep, I might think that the data is the end of the story, when in actuality, it's only the beginning. And so yeah, you're absolutely right. Now it's now taking the data and figuring out what the art of the sales process is in leveraging all of this information to make that connection, that personal connection.
Yeah, and there certainly is a segment of people in sales these days who, there's different ways people are using the term the science of selling, but who believe that it's that the importance of that personal connection is actually being diminished, right? That it's, if we can really parse the data appropriately and blend in a little of these signals and so on, that's really the process itself is paramount over that connection. And yet there's others, say, hey, we've got this art of selling that hasn't gone away either. That's equally as important to the science of selling.
Yeah, I was on a panel at a conference a few months ago, and we got into this discussion. And I think where most of us landed is that, well, one, they're equally important, right? Sales is both an art and a science. But
right.
But what technology has allowed us to do is it's allowed us to spend less time on the science of it, right? Because the tools and the technology that we have feed us all of this information. They allow us to, schedule our cadences and look at data very quickly to see what's working and what's not working. Where, before it might have taken us 5, 6, 10 times the length of time that it takes us now to really understand the science of sales. That happens very quickly. And so because of that, in a perfect world, what then it would then allow the sales person to do is spend that additional saved time on improving the art of the sale, because now I don't have to spend so much time on the automation.
So a question I have, and this is, I wouldn't expect you to have to answer this, but it'd be interesting if somewhere somebody's listening to this, they could chip in and tell me if they've seen this answer. Is, if we were to try to normalize individual sales rep productivity, let's say over the past 20 years. So sort of encompassing the start of the internet age up to, full-blown internet age where we are today. And so normalize to the extent we could for, dollar values and inflation, But has the productive capacity of a rep changed at all during this time frame?
Interesting.
And if it hasn't, then what impact is the technology having? That we're bringing to bear all these really cool things that I look back and think, God, I would have killed to have something like this. But are they really making a difference? And I'm not saying this from perspective of a Luddite, because I love the technology. I use the technology, but I also look at it and say, okay, I don't see the evidence yet that, it's helped us do anything but stay in place.
I don't have any sort of empirical evidence to this one way or the other, but my gut says, and working, with our sales teams here and with our sales teams to our customers, says that, we're more productive, or we're more efficient when it comes to knowing who to engage with. I think before, so I was in the sales intelligence industry back when I first started my technology career almost 10 years ago. And, it was good information, but as a sales rep or as a marketer, I was sort of spraying and playing. Like I was just praying that of all the calls I made or of all the emails that I send out, that the right person would respond.
Right.
And so I think that the biggest change that I've seen is that we've become much smarter about knowing how to prioritize and to rank the customers and the prospects that we should be engaging with because of all of the data that we have. Now, has it actually changed the behavior when we engage with them? I would say for some teams it has, and for other teams it hasn't. But I think there's that level of additional insight that we just didn't have 10, 15 years ago.
Oh, which I agree. Absolutely.
Yeah.
The question is, though, as a consequence, though, could we look at, if we could normalize all the data points, again, given emergence of technologies and so on and so forth, but it's saying, look, a rep selling a product of average, let's say average contract value or so on, are they, on average, selling 10% more, 20% more, the same, less than they were 20 years ago?
That would be a really interesting study to do.
Yeah, because I think it's one thing that seems to be missing, right? Because we have all this froth around these technologies we're embracing, but I haven't seen this data that says at the end of the day, we're selling as much with 10 people as we sold with 30 people before. So we're X% more productive, or that the individual, and I think it's the missing piece that's out there that would really be interesting to know.
That is, we haven't done that study. We did do this really interesting series with a few of our customers who sort of have gone from a startup to kind of a category killer in a really short amount of time.
Right.
And one of the things that we did see in doing this is that where previously, enterprises who had been around for a long time, just think, Oracle's, SAP's, IBM's, used to be able to sort of hold on to their market leadership a lot longer because of sort of their entrenched relationships in the industry, that it has become easier for companies as a whole to sort of displace and disrupt complete industries, kind of go from not showing up at all in the leader quadrant to being in a leader's quadrant in a really short amount of time. That's not specific to an individual sales rep, but I do think it speaks to the availability of this data and these insights out there being able to help companies grow a lot faster than they could previously.
Yeah, and that is right, and that's an interesting question in and of itself too, though, is because when I look at that and say, okay, and not to get too far off the beaten path here, but hey, it's my show, I can do what I want to, is that do take all that for granted, yes, but we have the same question, is a higher fraction, I can't remember whichever one works, is a higher fraction of companies, startups, succeeding now, right? A venture fund startups, let's say in a investor's portfolio, do a higher fraction succeed now than they did, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years ago. And I suspect that the ratio of those that succeed and that scale quickly, and disrupt probably hasn't changed.
Yeah, my guess is at a macro level, you're right. The actual overall percentage probably hasn't changed. I think what you probably find is that the behaviors of those who are successful are different. Yeah,
I think, to your point, I think the data and technologies enabled their path to success to be different. But I always sort of worry if it's not any more replicable than it was before, right? Meaning that, hey, 20 years ago, you could watch what a startup did that scaled quickly and say, we're going to try to do what they do and emulate what they did. But we still have all these other variables at play. And I think that's the same thing is true with individual sellers, right? There's so many variables at work as in what constitutes success and what drives success that we're doing a good job of capturing some, but we haven't captured the whole picture yet.
Well, and I do believe at the end of the day, the things that make a really successful salesperson fundamentally, right, aren't all that different. To your point, though, the tools, the data, the technology that's available is different. But kind of going back to that, the first sort of selling tip earlier, right?
Yeah.
The salespeople who are going to be most efficient are those who listen. Now, they now have more avenues to listen, right? They're going to be the ones who really understand and connect emotionally to the person on the other end of the phone. And again, there are now other channels and other places to connect with those people, but those fundamentals are still the same fundamentals.
Well, I agree. I've recently came up with a new acronym, at least new for me, to sort of summarize. I think it's sort of the 4 categories of behaviors that really drive success, and I think they're eternal to some degree in sales. Which is, my acronym is BALD, like BALD, which is B is be present, being focused, be there for the buyer. 2, ask great questions. L is listen without judgment, and D is deliver value on every touch.
I love it.
And I think if people can do that, master these, and there's some subcategories within those, but in general, if you master those 4 categories, you're never going to go wrong.
100%. I love that.
Oh, good.
And bald is such a visual,
Well, I called it the bald truth about sales.
Yeah.
But it's, I kept thinking, God, how do we simplify this, simplify it, because it seems like so much we do in sales, is increasingly complex. It's not just our processes and the technologies, but, the methods we teach that go along with it sort of all have this increasing level of complexity. And to me, it's like, how do we keep it really simple?
Right. How do we make sure we keep focus on those fundamentals while leveraging the new advancements that we have?
Exactly. Okay, so we're going to talk about that. So DiscoverOrg, you published an ebook called Sales and Marketing Intelligence is Democratizing Growth and Driving Disruption. And the first thing that caught my eye is, okay, democratizing growth. So what do we mean by democratizing growth?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the story I told earlier, which is, 30 years ago, the companies that were most successful were those who had these deep Rolodexes, right? They had built strong relationships in these industries. That's how people sold. And what has happened over the last 10 to 15 years is, as data has proliferated, as technology has proliferated, it's given startups now. To your point, they don't all succeed, but it's at least given startups the availability and the accessibility to the kind of data that they never had previously. And so when companies figure out how to use all of these insights and all of this intelligence that's out there really effectively, they're able to disrupt industries faster than they were able to do previously. And so that's sort of what we mean when we talk about democratizing growth. It's kind of leveled the playing field for a startup. Do they still have to execute? Do they still have to have a great product? Do they still have to have great salespeople who, can be present and listen and ask great questions? 100%. But now they've got the data, the information, the insights at hand that they just didn't have previously.
Yeah, and I think, for the world, for anybody in a newer enterprise, or even if you have a little more mature small business, you're trying to scale it. Yeah, these tools are, again, I would have killed for. I think about years I spent, about 7 years really focused on selling these sort of large, multi-million-dollar communication systems to overseas customers, international customers. And at that time, trying to find out who the decision makers were in Deutsche Telekom from 6,000 miles away was not an easy task. And we got it done, but it was markedly different than, as you said, having access to this information that gives you sort of a head start.
Right. You have access to the information, and then that way you can spend all that time that you used to have to spend trying to find all the key decision makers doing other things, right? Perfecting your sales techniques.
Yeah. Well, or just, perfecting an interesting opening to or entree to the customer to try to, make them interested. What's the value prop? So much more with that than. I'm so envious of people today.
Trust me, the first time I saw DiscoverOrg before I joined the company, I was sort of in that boat. I was in a company where we were selling these huge enterprise deals. I was trying to get into the Deutsche Banks of the world as well. And we would hire these interns to go do all this research for us. And then as soon as they would finish the research, which was good, it was out of date. Yep. And so I remember seeing the platform the first time and I was like, oh my God, how have I not had this my entire life? So the good thing is people now have access to this kind of information.
Yeah, and I think to your point is for companies that put together the right value proposition, really understand the needs of the customers, there's much less reluctance on the part of enterprises these days to invest in even mission critical applications from smaller companies.
Right.
So yeah, the doors open in a way that's never been before. It's interesting in the ebook you talk about that like 3/4 of sort of the early failures of tech startups that were trying to penetrate internet talked about being due to premature scaling. I thought that was an interesting phrase. So what did they actually mean by that? This was studied by Berkeley and Stanford researchers, basically investing and growing before you understood the needs of the customer, I guess, right?
That's exactly right. Basically, they, there are times I've seen too many times where companies go to market. They have a great sort of technology idea, and they go to market and they don't understand who their buyer is, and they don't understand how that product solves a challenge of the buyer. But it's a really cool product. But is it something that, let's say it's something that somebody sells to sales and marketers? Is it something that as a sales or marketer, I put enough value on that I'm willing to pay for it? And so that's, I think we've all probably been in that place where we've had somebody who had this great startup idea and you ask them, well, what challenge are you solving? Or, what value does your buyer put on this? And they can't clearly articulate that. And I think too many times companies take that approach.
Yeah, and you see it all the time. And part of that, though, I think it's certainly in tech startups. It's sort of the pressures from investors. And I've seen that with some companies that I've advised that they're being pushed in a way that the CEOs feel conflicted about. Okay, what am I supposed to say? I'm being pressured from the investors that we need to get this thing going, but we haven't really figured out what it is yet, right? Or we have to pivot, which oftentimes happens in startups. The first approach wasn't the right approach. CEOs, to your point, they really need to figure this out earlier in the game.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I also lead our product management function here at DiscoverOrg, and what's interesting to me is that product management, which fundamentally is the team responsible for sort of saying what is the market problem and how do you build a product that solves that problem, that is oftentimes one of the last functions to get built out in a company, yep. In a technology company, and yet yeah. It's actually it's sort of where the life cycle starts, is saying, I have enough
product market fit.
Right. I have enough inputs to say, this is the problem. This solution fits this problem. I understand how to build the product, but I also understand how to talk to the buyer, and then and get that right before you go to market, before you get all your salespeople out on the phone, before you get marketing sending out a bunch of emails, because you only have that first chance to make a great first impression, yeah. And you don't want to blow it.
Yeah, that's what my mom always said. You only get one chance to make a good first impression. It drilled into me. I still remember it. So I thought an interesting thing in the book, again, in the ebook, was the statement that, so quote, despite the wide availability of data and intelligence, many companies still cite lack of high-quality account and contact data, information intelligence as a top inhibitor to growth.
Yes.
And I'm like, okay, what cave are these companies living in?
Yeah.
Because there's no shortage. Let's set aside quality for a second. There's certainly no shortage of companies that make available data and sales intelligence, marketing intelligence, and so on to enterprises.
Yes. So I think that distinction is the important distinction. So that stat actually came from a survey we had done as part of a different ebook where we looked at what was the difference between high growth companies and low growth companies, and it was really interesting that even for companies who were growing fast, so even companies who fell into this high growth bucket, they said that the biggest limiter to growing even faster was having better quality data. And I think what it speaks to is, one, the proliferation of bad data. I mean, that's fundamentally why, Henry Schuck, who's our founder, created DiscoverOrg, because he saw people investing in bad data. So one, there's a proliferation of bad data. Two, even if people invest in good data is as good as it is at any given point in time. And a lot of companies, a lot of sales and marketing organizations haven't quite embraced the need to make the health of their data a core part of their sales and marketing strategy, right? No sales guy ever wants to talk about data, ever. He wants it to be good. He wants it to be there. But it's rare. It's very rare to have an organization that actually fundamentally puts data quality as sort of a core part of their overall sales strategy. And so I think it speaks to both of those things, that people recognize that there's value when there's good data, but are they willing to prioritize it?
Yeah, I mean, to me, the first impression when I read that statement was, well, this is just sales making an excuse again, right?
Yeah.
Because, hey, you can go out and address those issues, and we said vendors of varying degrees of quality in the data, but certainly with sales ops, data hygiene, I mean, these things are all things that are fairly well understood, right, as people scale organizations.
I think people understand them, but I think in most organizations I've been in, the majority of the conversations you have about, how do I hit my number this quarter, or how do we build a pipeline, or how do we, kind of improve our results, there are very few times when it comes back to data. And I think people fundamentally get it, but it's the ones who have invested in it and really sort of made it a focus, who have seen the results. They're the advocates of this process, but most companies would rather spend time thinking about how do I make my presentation better, right? Or how do I how do I make my collateral look better, or how do I speak right? So I think historically it's been easier for sales teams to sort of focus there. And I think what we have seen, and we've seen this certainly with our growth and with our customers, is that over time people are starting to understand how fundamental good quality data is to succeeding as a sales organization.
Yeah, I think that part of what has to happen is to me this whole idea of data, the intelligence, this has to be embraced. I don't know whether it's part of onboarding, it's part of the sales education we do of the sales team. But I think that if we were to, I'm willing to bet that if we look at our top performers, is they are the most adept at using the data that exists and that's available. And when we go to sort of the middle 70%, so let's say at the top 10%, we go to the sort of middle 70%, they're so, right? And you get to the bottom 20 and, that just doesn't work, right? So they're the ones saying we don't have any good leads. So it's how do we educate? And I think this is a challenge for sales leaders and for the reps themselves, is to educate themselves on the availability of this data and the intelligence and what it actually means for them, what they can do with it. If we talk about modeling behaviors of A players, rather than saying, hey, let's mimic what they say on this phone call, let's start with, how do they use the data to penetrate an account, establish connections, and so on.
It's interesting that you say that. At the end of the day, sales reps are motivated by the bottom line. And one of the things that we've done with our own team here is looked at what the behaviors are of our top performing sales reps and used those as stories. And then what we did was we replicated that model with our customers. And what we discovered, which we're fortunate enough to have discovered this, but we didn't know going in, was that the vast majority of the top performers within our customers' sales organizations were those that were using the data. They were logging in regularly. They were using that data to personalize their messages, to to listen, to ask questions, and when the lesser performing sales reps basically see the opportunity cost of not using the data, then it becomes much more meaningful to them.
Yeah, and I think the question there and the challenge is always, okay, how do we get them to do it consistently, right?
Right.
So how did it become an ingrained behavior? Say that again?
I said I haven't solved that yet.
Yeah. Well, I think but that's true for so much, right? I think that, with all the influx of technology into the sales space over the last handful of years, is that we still have this issue, is that, yeah, the people who get it and use it extremely well. But the vast majority of our sales teams still haven't yet, right? I mean, they may be embracing it and using it. You could look at an SDR team and say, yeah, they're all pretty good. In terms of how they're using our sales development platform, how they're using the available data. Yeah, okay, but let's look at we still have the same distribution of performance we've always had, right? Sort of the 80-20. How do we use these technologies and this data and intelligence to really, again, move that needle in a way that's meaningful?
I think, you always have top performers and bottom performers, but I do think you can show sort of consistent upward trajectory across a team. That is one thing we've been able to see is sort of, a before and after, before they have the data and after they have the data. Even the bottom performers are setting more meetings. So they still might not be the star. Maybe that's because they haven't figured out sort of this art, right? Some of those
sure.
Things on the art side. But overall, being able to say, you know what, we used to average 1 meeting for every 100 calls, and now we're averaging 5 meetings for every 100 calls. That is a significant improvement to the overall pipeline and bottom line.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely, I agree. And especially if you can get, again, your sort of middle, the big, vast middle of performers. Yeah, to see changes in the actual performance, you said from 1 to 100 to 5 out of 100, and you can see that all the way through to closing. That's fantastic. Well, Katie, it's been great talking to you. Tell people I can find out more about DiscoverOrg and connect with you.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks again, Andy, for having me. We can learn more about DiscoverOrg at www.discoverorg.com. It's not discover.org, so people get that confused.
I've done that more than once.
But it's discoverorg.com, and you can follow me on Twitter at katie.e.bullard, and would love to connect and talk more about how data is really changing the whole sales and marketing process.
Excellent. Well, good. Well, Katie, again, thanks for being on the show. And friends, thank you for spending this time with me today. Remember, come back again tomorrow. Join me here on another great episode of Accelerate. Until then, if you get a chance, really appreciate if you go to iTunes or wherever you listen to the show and subscribe if you haven't done so already, or leave a review. We really appreciate the feedback. So thanks again for joining me. Until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.